That's why this evening you can see in front of us we have ministers from the two countries, Scotland and Malawi. As some of you may know, last year at COP26, the Scottish government made headlines when it became the very first developed country to commit finances to address loss and damage. And the announcement has given a further shot in the arm on issues of finance, loss and damage, and Scotland is now viewed as a leader on this matter. Can we clap hands for Scotland? And this evening we are going to hear from the ministers from Malawi and also from Scotland, and we also have other speakers, after which we'll have to ask them some questions which they will answer, and time will also come when we give chance to the audience to also pose questions so that all of us will be at the same page. So without much ado, I would like to introduce and welcome on stage Honorable Aizen Hawandua Mkaka, MP, who is also the Minister for Natural Resources and Climate Change in Malawi. Honorable Minister, sir. Yes, all those in front will be speaking from the podium over there.
for the student relief.
No, don't worry, take your time. All good?
Yeah.
Thank you also to everybody who worked so hard on the tech. That's really good of you. I was just remarking that after such a long time of so much work and of so little action, loss and damage has finally found its way onto the agenda for COP27 this year. And I'd like to say, first of all, that it has been an enormous pleasure to have been part of this campaign with the Scottish Government. But far more than that, I just want us to take a moment to recognise those, including folks on the panel this evening, who have worked so hard on this issue for so long and in the face of such intransigence and inaction. It must be gratifying to see us get to this point, but we do have a long way to go, and I know that you know that. When we hosted COP26 last year, we wanted to use our platform to make clear two principles. Firstly, that at the heart of the climate emergency is an injustice in the fact that the people who are suffering its first and worst impacts are very often the same people who have done little or nothing to cause the problem. And the second principle is that Scotland, as a country, as an industrialised country who has benefited from and has been enriched by industrial processes, we recognise that we have a moral responsibility to assist those who are suffering. We were proud then to stand in solidarity with affected communities, and as has been said, to become among the first of the global North nations to pledge funds. We called for others to follow, and we're very pleased that we now have hundreds of millions of dollars which have been pledged in that way. However, it's not enough. We know that the burden of rebuilding and repairing where repairing is actually possible is still falling far too much on the shoulders of those who are least able to manage it. Climate justice demands of all of us that no longer is the case, and that those most able to shoulder the responsibility begin to do so. So the £2 million that we pledged at COP26 was very quickly helping communities on the ground in Bangladesh, in the Pacific Islands and in Malawi. And it's on Malawi that I would now like to turn. When Storm Anna and Cyclone Gombe devastated large areas of Malawi, support for communities was some of our very first loss and damage funding to be distributed. The Loss and Damage Programme Malawi, implemented by SKIA, Trocare Malawi and crucially their local partners, helped to co-design practical solutions to the problems that communities were facing. The programme, which runs to March 2023, also seeks to understand the knowledge gaps in supporting loss and damage. And in September, I was really fortunate to be able to virtually visit one of the communities in the Zomba district who are being supported by the scheme, and anyone who was there will know that my cat and I went along together. But one conversation in particular stuck out for me at that meeting. This was from Anifa Malembo, Vice Chair of her Village Protection Committee and Head of her household. She spoke to me about how the dike that had been built in the village had been washed away in the storms, of herself being caught up in the floodwater and nearly being washed away herself. She recounted this terrifying ordeal to me and set out the profound losses and damages that her community had suffered as a result. Because as well as those more obvious economic losses and damages, the trauma of the experience of something like that are often overlooked. So too are the fact that they often disproportionately affect women, and she was able to articulate that in a way that has really stayed with me. And that's why our First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, last week announced a further £5 million specifically for work on non-economic, slow onset loss and damage, and particularly the gendered aspects of that. Now, we have some wonderful contributions to hear today, and as I quite often say when it comes to my role in climate justice, I don't want to talk too much. I would far rather listen to the insights that are to be shared. However, in closing, I would just like to say firstly how proud the Scottish Government are of their long-standing and enduring relationship with Malawi. I'd like to say that our collaboration, including on the Malawi Loss and Damage Programme, is so important to us, and through our Climate Justice Fund, we will continue to work in cooperation now and in the future. I'd like to again thank our partners at SCIAF, Climate Justice Resilience Fund, Trocare, and the many others with whom I met this afternoon and had a detailed conversation about exactly what they've been doing on the ground. I want to thank them. I'd like to again recognise the tremendous activism that has gone into getting the issue of loss and damage to where it is today, hopefully on the precipice of a historic deal. And I'd like to end by urging the greatest possible ambition and bravery on behalf of all of those who are still negotiating this issue, because after 30 years of inaction, the risk is that the Global South lose faith in this process. So we must honour that faith with action. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was the Scottish Minister for Environment and Land Reform, Her Excellency Mairi McLean, MSP. Now, coming on stage, let me call upon Advocate Hafid Khan, Lead Developed Countries Group, to speak to us this evening.
Honorable Ministers, distinguished speakers, friends and colleagues, I'm really honored and privileged to speak before the ministers. Our understanding is that mitigation, adaptation and loss and damage is a continuum. Mitigation is the best form to avoid or avert the loss and damage. Adaptation that can minimize the potential risk of the loss and damage. Thirdly or finally, you need to deal with the residual risk. That's what the word coming, addressing loss and damage. So the Paris Agreement Article 8 adopted a standalone article where it says Article 8 is concentrate on averting, minimizing and addressing. But if we look at the convention, Warsaw International Mechanism was established back in 2013, that the Warsaw International Mechanism was established to address the loss and damage. So this is how the conflicts of averting, minimizing and addressing the issues of averting, minimizing and addressing. But from least developing country, our understanding is that to address a specific loss and damage that is associated with impacts of climate change needs or demands a specific financial mechanisms. For example, a flood affected community or ecosystems, they need immediate response soon after the flood or cyclones. Now question is how we can assist an affected community soon after the flood. If we look at the existing financial mechanisms under the convention like this year, that is mostly the project based. Developing countries need to develop the projects through a very critical procedure. Then they will be funded to implement that projects. But to address the loss and damage, project-based financing would not be useful at all. That's why we need an innovative financial mechanisms. But existing financial entities of the Convention and Paris Agreement cannot develop such kind of facilities or mechanisms. That's why LDCs and other developing countries are demanding here to establish a stand-alone operating entity that can develop further innovative financial mechanisms under that facility to assist to meet the needs of immediate needs of the vulnerable communities and ecosystem soon after a climate-induced events. So, Excellencies, this is the time, this is our ask, and developed countries need to respond to our ask. Warsaw International Mechanism was established back in 2013 with a broader intention of a mechanism. We do understand that mechanism is a broader perspective. The existing EXCOM of the Warsaw International Mechanism, that is acting as a policy arm. Later we established the Santiago Network, that is an implementing arm. Now this is the third arm, specific financial facility. That's what we are demanding. We the negotiators spent whole night on 5th November to agree on the agenda item. Excellencies, we are not asking for compensation or liability, no. But we need to ensure the solidarity, cooperative approach. We agreed in the agenda item. If you hear the COP presidencies read out while the adoption agenda item was adopted, it was clearly written there, this agenda item does not provide any basis for compensation or liability. But we adopted the agenda item, but what would be the outcome? All the developing countries, we are united. We are simply demanding a fund needs to be established here at COP27, and next 2 years, a transitional committee can work to develop further operational modalities. And after 2 years, at COP29, we can adopt those operational modalities, and fund can start their works maybe 2009 at COP 30. So these 2 years work program we are demanding here. If we look at the Santiago Network, we established in Madrid, we got the function in Glasgow, and we got here in institutional structure. I'm very happy to share with you that we got a very comprehensive institutional structure yesterday. We all negotiators, we fight in the negotiation room, but we are very good friends. And we celebrated yesterday because it is really a beautiful institution. We spent 3.5 nights here. Developed country negotiators and developing country negotiators, we work very hard and we got a beautiful institution. Now we are asking our partners, let's work with the same spirit, same flexibility. Let's establish the fund here and let's work 2 years. It is time to take action at the local level, at the national level, regional level. So colleagues, thank you for hearing me. I was running from the negotiating room. Let me go back there. If Excellency allow me, I would like to leave now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And that was Mr. Khan giving us the importance of loss and damage and also an update on negotiations, and we allow him to go and proceed with the negotiations. Thank you so much, Mr. Khan. Next on stage, let me welcome Maggie Wira, Program Coordinator of Trachea Malawi. She's going to speak on putting loss and damage into action.
Good evening. So as it's been said, I'm Maggie Wira. I work with PROCRA, where I am coordinating the loss and damage action research project. We're calling it action research because it's a learning piece. as it's been said, that there's a lot of gaps. And for example, our minister said that the NDCs have not explicitly included loss and damage. So we want to be able to fill some of those gaps as we're designing our loss and damage frameworks and all that. We want to contribute to that. So we are implementing this project with funding from the Scottish Government, with £2 million that were pledged last year. Part of that is going to this loss and damage project. So why this loss and damage project is, as you understand, there's a lot of confusion on what is loss and damage, the conceptual framework of loss and damage, how do you measure loss and damage and all that. So we want to have a clear understanding, especially from the Malawian perspective, to say, for example, if we're talking of loss and damage in Malawi, what exactly are we talking about? But also, if we want to look at programming, what are the things that we need to look at when we're doing our programs? So this is why this loss and damage that we're implementing in Malawi is going to support us with. So the program, as it's been said, also it's being implemented in 2 districts. So we have Nsanje and Zomba. So these are some of the areas in Malawi that are year in, year out experiencing extreme weather events. So it's up until March, and we're implementing, for example, with SKIA, with our partner CISONET, the Civil Society Network on Climate Change, but also other 2 partners in Zomba and in Nsanje. And it's until, as I said, up until March. So why do we have this project? So we had been implementing the Climate Challenge Program Malawi for about 4 years. That was also supported by the Scottish Government. So this program was looking at building the resilience of the community. Very community-led, co-designed with the communities together, where they were able to identify their challenges, and then they were able to identify what are the interventions to that, particularly relating to access to water, access to food nutrition, food security, but also renewable energies. But within that period of implementing this project, there's a number of disasters that we experienced. So as the history of Malawi, and we look at the stats of Malawi, the frequencies and the intensities and the magnitude of even the coverage of disasters keeps on increasing. So 10, 20 years ago, disasters, for example, would have floods maybe 10 years, in the space of 10 years. But right now you have it maybe, for example, the worst one was 2016, and then you have 2019, and then this year we had 2 of them. So the frequency and the intensity of that is also increasing, and therefore also a lot of people are also being affected. So we need this, it pushes us backwards instead of moving forward. So all the development interventions, instead of moving us forward, they are not leading us anywhere. So that's why it's very important that we're able to address this, the losses and damages that are being experienced. Just to give you an example of what those drawbacks, or what are the challenge that the extreme weather events would have posed to Malawi. So on your top left, that's a M1 road in Malawi, to one of the districts that we're implementing in Chipawa. So that area was cut off, and some people in that area were cut off from the city for about 3 days or a week. So you're not able to go. Some people that commute to work, they're not able to go to work. Or some people that hospitals and all that, they're not able to get resources. And even during this time, when responding to this flood, they had to find means of getting to the people in those locations. And then on the top bottom left, that's an article from the papers of our electricity situation. So we lost about 30% of our electricity being generated in the country. That challenge still stays on up until now. So we have like load shedding schedules because of prolonged load shedding schedules because of that challenge. And then at a very small scale on the right is that top right, that's our irrigation scheme that was established by the Climate Challenge Program that I talked about in Malawi. So that was just the people that, over 60 people that depended in that irrigation scheme were not able to farm anymore in that period. And then apart from all these easily identifiable losses and damages. You have some that do not easily come by. So you have that statement that came about. I think that was a case study that Sissonek commissioned. So they'll tell you about migrating. We have to move because our areas are not habitable anymore. But moving is not as an easy thing because you're leaving your culture, you're leaving your identity, you're leaving your family, and you have to start over. And that's not an easy thing. And you're starting not because you want to, but because you're forced. So that becomes also a challenge. So that's just to show why we need to do something about loss and damage. Because people are now experiencing it. As much as we are discussing or not agreeing on what is loss and damage, on how do we identify that, but people are experiencing it. So when we started this project, we had to understand the needs of the community first. So it is challenging because as a pretty new agenda, there's not as many tools to do assessments. So we have tried in the project, as I said, it's a learning project. So we have tried. What we've used is what is known as the participatory vulnerability capacity assessment. So we have modified it. And so we start with the communities in the two districts, the communities where the district councils are located for this project. And we start with them, we had conversations with them using all those tools so that we understand their context. We understand what their needs are, but also they should be able to say how do they think those needs would be addressed. So we are all in this sector, so I'm sure you know these tools. So, but what we did was that we had them gendered because we understand that women are the worst affected. They face most of the brunt as far as climate change is affected, especially for Malawi being most of our livelihoods being natural, not environment-based. So, but also in this PVC, we added what is known as the access and control tool, which is very gendered. We want to understand how do the different groups of the communities, groups in the community have access to resources, but also control of these resources. And then we also added a KII, where we borrowed from the post-event review capacity, where we also had to understand the agents, but also the processes in that community that contribute to the resilience of that community or the lack of it. So when we at this stage of the project, we have done that. And we are in the process of looking through the findings of those assessments. And so some of the preliminary findings of that assessment would be like what Minister McCallan talked about. The community in one of the areas that we're implementing in Zomba, the community by themselves over 10 years, they had to construct by hand a dike that to protect themselves from a river that viciously causes year in year out floods. So they rallied themselves, they asked around from the minister, they asked from all the other organizations that are working in that community, they asked for the support. So they constructed that dike by their own, with their own initiative. And this year, when Anna came, it weakened that dike. And then when Gombe came 2 weeks later, or was it 2 weeks later, completely burst the dike. So you have houses destroyed. That also means people had to evacuate, with nowhere to evacuate to but schools. So also that has other effects. So schools will not happen in that period. But also you have people losing their crops, which is their very livelihood, and land that was supposed to be utilized was now covered by sand. So it becomes infertile. And then also you're also looking at livelihood investments that were destroyed. So irrigation schemes that were invested in were destroyed. Order points were destroyed, just to mention but a few. And then also some things that do not easily come about when you're doing assessments of extreme weather events would be the non-economic losses. So they were able to say our graveyards were washed away, or in that period, in that time when the floods occurred, we're not able to bury our people. because the grounds were saturated with water. We can't go to the graveyard and bury our people. And if you're in the Muslim community, for example, you're supposed to bury people the very same day that they pass. So that is going against your traditions. And then you're also looking at the trauma. Minister Mary talked about NIFA. NIFA is a member of a civil protection committee that responds during disasters. She was caught when Cyclone Anna happened. She went to do assessments. She was caught in Cyclone Bombe. So you should understand that this person still remains to be a member of the civil protection committee. Is she going to work freely when the next flood comes? She will have fear and the trauma. But also when we were doing this assessment, the communities kept saying that we are so afraid that if the rainy season starts again, it's going to flood again. So they are constantly living in fear. So these are some of the preliminary findings, but there's quite a lot of, especially the non-economic losses and damages, because they don't easily come about. And we are realizing that there might be some that have not come about in this assessment. So we might need to revisit our assessments again. Just also to give you a very good example of what happened, the port from Zomba. So, which is also an example of non-economic losses and damage. So they will tell you when Lake Shira is an basin lake in Zomba. So it doesn't, over a period of time it dries up, but now it's becoming frequent. The drying up becomes frequent. So they'll tell you and that's the livelihood of people. They do fishing in that community, mostly men. So when it dries up, men would, being a man who provide all the house, they would have to leave and search for elsewhere. But then in that moment, they will not want to come back. And what happens to the families? The woman has to take over, and that's the end of the family. So there's a lot of issues that will come about. And then, so when we had done the assessment, looking at the needs that had been identified, we sat with the community. So what should we do? What do you want this project to do? So one was that we should support the early warning systems, particularly community early warning systems, that the community should be able to get information and be able to plan advisories that they should be able to respond in good time. But also the second thing was that the rehabilitation of the damaged infrastructures. And key in Zomba, for example, what they said was that even if the project was to do nothing else but rehabilitate our dike, we're fine. Because that for them was the greatest need, is still the greatest need. That even if you we just rehabilitate our dike, if that's the only thing that we do in Zomba, that is fine. But it's a huge ask, because you're looking at 7.5 kilometers of a dike. And it doesn't have to be man-made now, it needs to be properly structured. But so we are liaising with the district council on how we can support this community in the meantime in this project, because it's a short period of short time project, but we are supporting, we are working with the district council, and also looking at the housing. So looking how do we build back better the houses, how do we make them to be able to withstand. And then also we're trying to be innovative, to use, for example, art, to say that there's those non-economic losses and damages. How do we bring the community to understand them, that they should be able to articulate them, that these are coming because of climate change. So I think our partner, Sisonic, they had used that to lobby, but also we want to use it at other communities to be able to unearth those experiences. And then also looking at the psychosocial support. We're still trying to structure, to see how we can structure that activity, but we're going to work together with the community on how we can support that. And then also, lastly, because it's a learning piece, we're looking at research. So research, for example, I think I can give it to Julius to talk about some of the piece of research that the project is going to work on. Yeah. So with that, Julius is going to talk about the research that we're looking at, and then that's it for me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. That was Magnira. Do you want to speak now? To just collaborate on what she said? Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. So my understanding was that I'm going to come at the end, but then it's fine. Just for a few minutes. The two pieces of research that CISONEC and the consortium that is working on this project are actually carrying out. The first one was to really understand what the communities are feeling in terms of losses and damage. So as Maggie was saying, we were able to actually go on the ground together with partners to document case studies on how the communities are actually feeling the impacts of climate change, especially on the loss and damage, particularly on the non-economic loss and damage. So part of the work that my colleague has already mentioned is what is really coming out from the simple research that we have done on the non-economic loss and damage. But on the two critical studies that we also commissioned, the first one is to understand the methodologies that we can use to really quantify non-economic loss and damage. This is one of the things that, beyond the studies that have been done, no one is actually looking at how best do we want to contribute to this line of quantifying the non-economic loss and damage. But not only looking at what the science or the scientific colleagues can do, but we want to relate it to what the communities, the real life experiences of communities on how they also can be able to contribute to this issue of quantifying the non-economic loss and damage. But the other piece is to understand how best, from the global piece of legislation and even the national pieces of legislation on climate change, how best we want to relate this issue of litigation on issues to do with loss and damage. It was actually coming out as an idea because our colleague, the leadership of the Scottish government, actually raised that ambition in terms of wanting to understand whether and how countries can also be able to compensate some of the issues and also the issue of reparation. So thank you so much. These are some of the work that we want to take forward, and by the end of November or December, two of these pieces of research are going to be concluded, and we are going to be sharing and publishing them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julius. That was Mr. Julius Ngoma, the National Coordinator for CISONEC. Finally, let me request Professor Salim Haq to speak to us on the importance of locally laid responses and the national frameworks for loss and damage. Professor.
Thank you very much, Hillary, Honorable Minister Mkaka, Minister McCallum, Maggie, and Julius. It's a great pleasure for me to be here to share the work that we have been doing in my center, the International Center for Climate Change and Development, with support from the Scottish Government. But before I do that, let me take this opportunity to recall our experience in Glasgow, if I might, for a couple of minutes. For those of you who are involved in the negotiations and were there in COP26, you may recall that the developing countries at that time, also chaired by Pakistan on behalf of the G77 in China, had tabled a motion in the Climate Pact, the Glasgow Climate Pact, for the creation of what we then called the Glasgow Finance Facility on Loss and Damage. That was in the draft text of the final Glasgow Agreement until the last day of the COP. And then the COP was extended by the COP26 president by an extra day. And he told us to go home, sleep, and come back, and we'd get the final text. And when we got the final text, the words had changed. It became the Glasgow Dialogue on Finance for Loss and Damage. and it would be a 3-year dialogue. So they were willing to talk for 3 years, but not do anything for 3 years. And needless to say, it was a very, very great disappointment for the vulnerable developing countries in particular. So we didn't give up. This year, we brought that agenda item under the finance agenda as a sub-item under finance for loss and damage. And one important event that happened in the intervening period was Pakistan got hit by a devastating flood, half of which was not caused by them. It's scientifically attributable to global warming, the impacts of those floods. So Pakistan, who now continues to chair the G77 in China, has become a very strong champion of asking for the polluters to pay the cost of the damage that they have caused in those floods. And if you listen to the Pakistani Prime Minister who was here at the beginning, and the Environment Minister who's still here, Sherry Rahman, they're extremely passionate about this, and quite rightly so, and speaking on behalf of all the developing countries. And as you heard from Hafiz Khan just now, we are very united in asking for that finance facility, which we did not get in Glasgow, to be set up here in Sharm el-Sheikh. So let's see, the text is going to be released soon. We remain hopeful that this time around we will be able to persuade all countries that this is the time for a political decision to create the fund or the facility here, and then the details can be worked out. As Hafiz says, we can take a couple of years to sort out the details and all the questions that people legitimately have about what it would do, how it would work, etc. But the questions come second. The political decision to set it up is important, and we want that to happen here, and we hope that will happen here within the next few hours. But let me also say that one of the things that we have to prepare for, whether or not we get a decision in the COP, is to deal with the impacts of climate change, because they're real. When each of us fly home from Sharm el-Sheikh, climate change is going to be coming with us. It's going to be affecting us every single year in Malawi, in Bangladesh, in Scotland. All of us are going to be affected by the impacts of climate change, whether we like it or not. That's a reality we have to now live with. We have to understand, we have to prepare, and we're not prepared. We have to be better prepared, and that's true for even a developed country. All of us need to learn, go up a learning curve very, very fast. So we're very pleased that Scotland, in the allocation of the £2 million that they provided in Scotland, they last year in Glasgow allocated some funding to us to help us with a university network that we have established and been running for a number of years, called the Least Developed Countries Universities Consortium on Climate Change, LUCCC, or LUC we call it for short, where we've been building capacity, sharing knowledge, exchanging knowledge and information and capacity building, primarily for a number of years on adaptation to climate change, particularly locally led adaptation to climate change. But now that we are segueing into having impacts of climate change, working on locally led loss and damage tracking and working on that. And we got support from them to do it in a number of countries in Africa and with our university networks. And we also received some funding from the Open Society Foundation, who also put money on for loss and damage last year in Glasgow, to do a number of other countries. So we had about 7 or 8 countries, including the ones funded by Scotland and the ones funded by the Open Society Foundation. They did some preliminary assessments of the state of play of how disasters, climate-related disasters, floods, hurricanes or droughts are currently dealt with, where the gaps are, what needs to be done next. And I'm very pleased to say that they came to Sharm el-Sheikh last week, and we had an evening event where they presented their work. A bunch of, I think 7 young researchers, all women, did some marvelous work. Your colleagues from the Scottish government were there as well. I was very impressed by them, I must say. And we see that as a building block. So every country, as I said, is going to have to deal with the problem, whether the UNFCCC does something about it or not. Malawi will have to deal with the problem. And so we need to be building our capacities. And universities are good institutions where we can generate the knowledge. It can then capacitate the government and the people, and we can build on that knowledge as a learning by doing process going forward, because unfortunately we have now entered what I call the era of losses and damages from climate change. We're going to have to live with it for the coming years to come, whether we like it or not. And as I said, none of us are well prepared. All of us need to improve our preparedness, and particularly from the developing countries, the poorer developing countries, the least developed countries, is something that we are already taking on board. And I'd like to thank the Government of Scotland for the help they gave us. I hope that will continue with the next phase of the 5 million additional funds that First Minister Nicola Sturgeon announced when she was here last week as well. Just one final comment in appreciation of the Government of Scotland. They were the first, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon was the first political leader to step up when we were in Glasgow, even though the leaders who came to the UNFCCC didn't offer any money, they just offered to talk for 3 years. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, who was also our host in Glasgow, did step up and offer £2 million and invited other leaders to do that. We had the government of Wallonia also step up with €1 million. So we are very grateful for them for doing that. And I would like to appreciate not just First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, her government, but also the people of Scotland. You know, one of the things we felt while we were there was a genuine empathy and sympathy from everybody we met, including members of civil society. I know Ben and his work, his colleagues have been very, very instrumental. So we really do feel that feeling of solidarity, feeling of empathy, which is much more than the money. And really, thank you.
Thank you so much. That was Professor Hunt. Now, I'm going to ask questions. Actually, it's one question for each one of them to respond to. And before I do that, I just want to announce that at the end of this session, we are going to have refreshments. So please make sure that you attend up to the end, because we have some Scottish snacks out there. So please wait up to the end of this session. I will pose a question which each one of the five will respond to, and thereafter we'll have a picture taken. After that, I will ask the two honorable ministers to get back to the to sit down there, and I will remain with the three who are going to answer questions from you. So as we continue, please start thinking about the questions that we are going to pose to the panelists. But meanwhile, I would like to ask a question which each one of the five are going to answer, starting from Julius to the minister here. So the question is, what is the most important thing we can learn from the Scotland Malawi loss and damage project about addressing loss and damage internationally? Should I repeat the question?
Thank you. So, thank you so much for the question. And really, being one of the few actors that have been, interacted with the Scottish government, but also being able to implement something from the money that was provided by the Scottish government, the 2 million. I think it's something. Okay, we need to actually involve more of the communities on the ground, especially when we want to explore more about how to address the issue of loss and damage. The action research that we are doing from the money that was provided from the Scottish government actually is a good example that helps us to connect with the local communities themselves, understand what this issue or how they feel about losses and damages, but also how they are preparing themselves to take on this issue of loss and damage. So it's a very practical way of trying to understand the needs, but also trying to be able to build a case, build case studies, and also finding solutions that will actually resonate with what the local communities will want to see by the end of the day when it comes to addressing the issue of loss and damage. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mark, what do you think this kind of arrangement between Malawi and Scotland would help internationally?
So I think it, not just the project in Malawi, but I think even the whole commitment by the Scottish government to Bangladesh, to Malawi, and to the other countries that are benefiting from the support that has been provided is, I think, in very short way. Let's talk more action. So instead of talking for 3 years, the people are suffering now, and they need support now. And then I think this just shows the solidarity, but also the urgency of the matter, because we cannot continue to talk when some people are dying and they're losing, countries are losing their development rates. So I think let's talk more action is what I would say.
Thank you so much. Professor, what is your message to the international world?
Thank you. Thank you very much. So let me just say that one of the consequences of the funding that Scotland initiated and others then followed was the creation of what I am calling a coalition of actors on loss and damage. Not talkers like the negotiators here, but actors. And the government of Scotland also very kindly organized an event in October, about a month ago, in Edinburgh, inviting the people that they had supported, as well as others who are already doing things, to come together for 2 days, share our knowledge and experience and what we had been doing and investing in and learning. And that was an extremely useful sharing of initial actions to tackle climate change, particularly the impacts of climate change and the losses and damages associated with it. And that, I think, is a very good initiative that we can now build on, and I hope Scotland will continue to perhaps convene an event around October, a month before the COP, of the actors, a coalition of actors, not negotiators, but people doing things, sharing that knowledge and sharing as we learn. As I said, we have a long way to go on learning about loss and damage. It's a complicated subject, right? There are no easy answers. But we can do that. We will learn as we go along, and we can share our learning. And one very important part of that shared learning is it's applicable for everybody. It's not just developing poor countries that need to learn. It's rich countries also need to learn. And so there's a mutual benefit in learning from each other here and helping each other be able to cope with what are unfortunately going to be the inevitable impacts of climate change all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Let me, before I go to Scotland, I think Scotland should finish. Let me ask the Honourable Minister from Malawi to respond to that question. What is the most important thing we can learn from the Scotland-Malawi loss and damage project about addressing loss and damage internationally? Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much. To me, the lesson is climate change is not fiction. Loss and damage are not fiction. Whilst we are busy dialoguing, talking and discussing in air-conditioned rooms like we are doing right now, climate change is taking place. Pakistan is being hit by floods. Malawi is feeling the impact of Cyclone Gombe, Cyclone Idai. These are real things that are happening. So whilst our friends would like to procrastinate, climate change is not sitting there waiting for us. And therefore, we need people that are pragmatic. We need people that are practical in their approach. And to me, Scotland has just demonstrated that. So the greatest lesson to me is action, action, and more action.
Thank you so much. And finally, let me request the Honourable Minister from Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I could scarcely put it better myself, but I will try because I've been asked. I think for us, there are two main lessons that we take from this and that we take forward. Firstly is on the fundamental point of the cash, the money being available. It's been talked about this afternoon. We strongly support formal funding mechanisms. And we very much hope that we see resolution of that this week. But the point of what we did last year was about saying we won't wait any longer whilst we keep making that argument. Let's make the money available in the interim, use that to make a difference, use that to increase our learning, but equally use it to create that momentum for others to follow suit. I think you called it the coalition of actors. That's what we wanted to drive. The second part, once the funding is available, second important thing for us is the way that it's distributed. We need it to be done urgently. We need it to be money that is additional, never substituting for spending on mitigation and adaptation. It must never create indebtedness to the countries who have caused climate change. And finally, and this has always been at the heart of the Scottish Government's climate justice policy, is that it should be community-led. And I think as Maggie and others have pointed out, about never imposing our ideas on what's best for a community, but supporting them with resources to build that themselves. And as everyone has said, at one point or another, to be prepared to stop talking, start listening, and start acting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So the point is action, action, action. How I wish we had representatives from other countries and listen to what we are talking about and emulate what Scotland is doing. It is our hope that after this COP, then others will join in and do more of acting and not talking. This marks the end of this session. Now we'll have a picture of the panelists, after which I will ask the two honourable ministers to step down there, and then we'll have a few questions from the audience to the three panelists. So could we have a picture down here?